Hi everyone, I'm Miley Martin from Student Activities at Fresno City College. And today we're spotlighting Hispanic Heritage Month with Fresno City College's own Matt Espinoza Watson, who is also the Chicano Latino Studies Program Director. Matt, welcome. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Miley. Thanks for having me here. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Trying to maintain in these interesting circumstances that keep shifting, and but
Definitely. At least we get to we can still meet up in
exactly,
Zoom and talk and
exactly.
see how you're doing. Well, it's so good to see you. And I miss seeing everybody on campus just like you. You know, we are celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month through October 15th. And I just wanted to hear what Hispanic Heritage Month means to you personally and how your interests in history influenced you to get into higher education.
Okay, great. Yeah, sure. I think that question, I'll take the first piece of the question, what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to me? And kind of maybe look at it in two ways. One is, at first, the first, I think, main thing that it means to me is its opportunity to learn, to share, to celebrate and investigate a particular community. And so there's, I think, within that month, the opportunity to do a lot of different things. It does obviously kind of fall right around what is Mexican Independence Day, starting on September 15th into the 16th is Mexican Independence Day. And then a lot of other Latin American nations celebrate their independence kind of around that same exact time, right? And so that's one aspect that usually kicks it off, right? But I think another kind of answer to it is more rooted in the history of the event itself, right? And that's, it became Hispanic Heritage Month under the Reagan administration in the 1980s. And that's its own particular piece, I guess. But going back a little further, it started off as Hispanic Heritage Week under the Johnson administration in 1968. And so I go back to that just because for me, that history is really a really fascinating one. I mean, it's 1968 is when this kind of starts off as a thing. Again, Hispanic Heritage Week. And 1968 is in many ways like the height of so much kind of youth and radical movements throughout our country, whether that's the civil rights pieces or again, the Chicano movement or the anti-Vietnam War movement. There's so much kind of going on at that particular point in history. And so the Chicano movement is happening and it's like full swing here, especially here in the state of California, here in the Central Valley, for instance. And so the idea of Chicana and Chicano was really embracing a very particular identity, a very particular way of looking at oneself, and in particular a way of looking at oneself and the U.S. Chicano was in many ways about embracing kind of the journalist for the LA Times, Ruben Salazar, said that a Chicano is a Mexican American with a non-Anglo image of himself or themselves. And so that was a particular kind of, again, like, I don't know, that movement, and it had a particular way of, again, kind of seeing who we are, how we fit into this whole world and everything, into the society we're in. And Hispanic was very much, I don't know, ran counter to that in some ways, in some major ways, right? Hispanic, and the idea of being Hispanic was kind of being created at that exact time. Like Hispanic Heritage Week is probably in 68, it's some of the first times you ever see that word just like existing in print, becoming a new category of identity, right? And by 1970, it's the new term on the census. And from 70 till now, we've all gotten used to it. It's the main term we see around us. It's the main term we're gonna see on any government forms or anything, right? But so again, to me, it just being somebody who's fascinated with the history and everything, right? And with the law, with regard to our communities, right? I think it's just a fascinating, I don't know, the thing to look at that history for a second and to think about the idea that in 68, kind of Hispanic Heritage Week is being really crafted to reach out to this community as Americans and to bring them in to kind of assimilate them as Americans and embrace their heritage as part of American heritage.
Mhm.
At the same time that, again, these other movements are happening saying, no, we're rejecting that and we're gonna do our own thing. And these nationalist movements that are, again, very much at their height at the time, whether it's the Brown Berets or others who are also very much tied with other kind of, again, radical movements at the time, the Black Panthers and things like that are happening. And so I think right now at the time we're in today, with all of the movements around police brutality and different issues that have been happening, especially this year, right? It's, again, to me, fascinating to just think about that history and how much identity and who you are is tied up sometimes in these words that we might use, like Chicano, Hispanic, or Latino. While at the same time, for many of us, it's just a marker. It's just something we fill out on a paper, and we don't spend too much time thinking about it. Within Chicano Latino studies, we definitely spend a lot of time kind of looking at that stuff and looking at those terms themselves and how they reflect different ideas about kind of who you are and where you fit into the society around us, I guess.
But
so,
the word Hispanic, Hispanic, does that come from Spain? Does it derive from Spaniard or Spain?
Yeah, basically, I mean, it does. It's kind of, it sounds like it, and that is correct. I mean, it's, and the official, I guess, idea of it that comes from the government and the census in 1970 is that Hispanics are people from a Spanish-speaking country, right? So you don't have to speak Spanish to be Hispanic, but you or your ancestors come from a place where Spanish is the dominant language. And so that includes Spain as the main place where the Spanish language is spoken, and it includes most of Latin America, right? But there's there's a difference in that sense of saying, Hispanic versus Latino. Latino is more rooted in the idea of geography and Latin American identity. Hispanic is more rooted in the Spanish language, and you or your people being Spanish speakers, essentially. To just briefly, I guess, come back to the other part of your question, which was, how my influence or how my interest in history kind of influenced me wanting to be involved in education. I would say that it was really because as I got started examining any of this history, which to me was freshman year, Fresno State, taking my first kind of Chicano studies classes there. And realizing there was so much to learn about. There was so much that I hadn't ever come across in kind of my K through 12 experience. And as I began learning more, it kind of fed that interest more and more. And so graduating from Fresno State, I studied philosophy and Chicano studies, did a dual bachelor's there before going on to law school. And then in law school, I ended up having really just the opportunity to take a lot of classes very directly relevant to this particular population, whether that was just kind of general race and American law classes, or classes on civil and constitutional rights of immigrants, or classes on education and the history of segregation or bilingual education within the educational settings. So through my law school experience, I also kind of kept going further into what I would call now Chicano studies, broadly. And so there was just, again, so much. I'm still just there in terms of being fascinated, still learning more all the time, still wanting, but it was that desire to learn more. And it was really that seeing that there was so much out there to learn about, and in particular, so much out there to learn about relevant to our communities that very few of us ever have had access to. And seeing how transformative that could be also for myself and for others around me. Once we started engaging with that history or that, some of those topics. So that was just kind of a piece of what I thought in terms of how my interest in history influenced me to get involved in education. It was really just kind of, I kept going with it in different ways, and then kind of jumped at an opportunity. I was still in the Bay Area after law school, and jumped at an opportunity to teach one kind of intro to Chicano studies class back in 2006. And since then, I've basically just kind of kept going with it, and so yeah, that's a little bit of my history with it.
Wow, great history, great history. In just preparing this, I had seen that in 2016, the U.S. Census said 1 in 6 Americans identify as Hispanic or Latino, and I'm sure here in the Central Valley, those numbers are a lot higher. I was just curious, are you involved in any other national or local organizations? And for students watching today, how can they get more involved either on campus or in the community?
Yeah. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about those numbers just for a sec, because I think it's relevant to the other part of the question, I guess, right?
Yes.
And so you said, as you said, it's about 16%, I think, in the U.S., right? 1 in 6. In the state of California, it's about 40%. 40% identify as Hispanic Latino. In the county, Fresno County, we're jumping. So these numbers are going to keep jumping. We go from the national to the state, where we're 40%, to the county of Fresno, where we're 55% of the population. Last time I looked, the last stats I saw for Fresno City College, the student population of Fresno City was 58% Hispanic or Latino. And then the last one I'll offer is just that as you look a little bit younger, right, to our schools, to schools within Fresno County at least, right, the data I've seen says Latinos comprise about 65% of K through 12 students right now, right? And so, so again, just to give some of those numbers in terms of give a little bit more context, it's very much the case, as you said, that here in the Central Valley, those numbers are higher, right? It is 6 out of 10 students that you're going to see at Fresno City, or almost 7 at the K through 12 are Latino or Hispanic background. And so to me, that really does bring one of bring up a good answer to something you asked about: how can students get more involved in supporting and serving that community. And I would say, through getting involved with young people, through getting involved in volunteering at your local school, through getting involved in volunteering if you have siblings or nieces and nephews, or whether you don't, right? And just, live by an elementary school, as most of us do. I know, again, COVID, obviously, pandemic has changed how we do everything, right? In terms of volunteer opportunities and everything else. But I do think that, that's the primary thing that comes up to me in terms of like one way that is that can take so many different forms also, whether that's after school reading programs or whether that's actually kind of volunteering in the day-to-day of the class. But students just need a lot more support and mentorship, and to be able to know about the opportunities that are available to them through education. To know that reading can be fun and interesting, because a lot of folks don't grow up with that idea, whether they're Hispanic, Latino or not. And I would say also, to me at least, that's a place where, regardless of the fact that, as I just shared, it would be about 65% of those young people in our schools in Fresno County are Hispanic or Latino. It's also, I think, just a great place to get involved, period, with the other 35% of our students who aren't also, right? And so I do think that's one of the big things that stands out to me. In terms of organizations, I guess, that folks could get involved with. I mean, there are many. I've been, on our campus in past years, been involved, well, for one, with the Latino Faculty and Staff Association, which does a lot on our campus to promote, for one, to give out student scholarships every year, to hold this really great thing that's called the Latino Graduation Celebration, and to raise money for those scholarships, as well as to try to put on cultural events. As far as orgs that students could get involved with, well, another one that's at least campus related that I've been very involved with as an advisor for many years is MECHA, which is the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, or the Chicano student movement, basically, is kind of what the gist of that is. And so MECHA has been just a student group I've worked with closely for, again, at least the past 10 years or so. That group changes often in terms of like what the focus is from semester to semester, whether it's more political in nature or more about culture and celebrating culture or investigating those things together. So MECHA has been a great place for students to plug into, also a support network, I would say, a support system for many of our students. Student clubs offer that sort of function too, as a place to hang out, a place to get to know people, and also feel supported in your educational journey, right? And so that's a great organization, I would say, that I've worked with, especially on campus. There are a lot of them in the community, though, also, that, I mean, depending on kind of, again, your area of interest. California Rural Legal Assistance is an organization I've worked with for several years, especially when I was in kind of more in the legal arena. But that's an organization that's a statewide org, really focused on farm workers' rights, basically, and so that's again maybe a particular segment of our population who is working in the fields, who are mostly immigrants working in the fields, or children of immigrants who are in that kind of rural and farm work situation. Let's see, I guess a couple others that I'd just highlight locally that to me are important, and that I've worked with either through students or I guess on my own. But Californians for Justice, the Communities for a New California, Mi Familia Vota. Those are three that are very, to me, kind of pop up in terms of being very civic oriented and engaging people and trying to register people to vote and trying to push for good changes within our communities. And then another just kind of comes to mind, the Education and Leadership Foundation. Raul Moreno over there has been doing amazing work for many years. And a couple, I guess, maybe in a different, just I guess a couple that come up to me that are a little bit different or like more cultural based, but like Arte Americas is an incredible cultural center that should be taken advantage of both as an art museum and as a space for, again, gathering and events and speakers. And especially they always tend to have a big Dia de los Muertos celebration in October, November. Another that just I'll throw in there before I start, I don't know, I feel like I'm listing too many things, but is another though that came to mind in terms of organizations locally that does some really awesome work is some group we've collaborated with a few times on campus, but it's called Dulce Upfront. And that's kind of a cultural group that does just, I think, this beautiful range of events and music and art, really showcasing, I would say, music, art, and creative expression that cuts across a lot of kind of the racial and ethnic and gender and age lines and invites everybody always to come to their events and to be part of kind of the stuff they're doing. And so I've seen, although I haven't been out there that much in recent months, I've seen through social media and stuff that Dulce Upfront was very involved in some murals that have happened recently that, in the midst of, again, the George Floyd protests and everything. And so there's a lot of cool places to get involved depending on kind of your interest, right? Again, I'd start with the schools, but going from there, there's so much else too. Yeah.
Wow, you shared a lot of great organizations that it just makes me go, oh yeah, we've had them on campus, we've had them performing. Dulce, the group you just mentioned, they were in the OAB courtyard performing. So a lot of them have been on campus in different forms. City College works hard at sharing culture and diversity on campus. What events or activities would you like to see more of?
Yeah,
If anything.
Totally. I think we could do a lot more events and stuff in that, especially around these times like Hispanic or Latino Heritage Month. I would agree that I think the college does a good job. I would say in particular, student activities does a really good job. Really, I mean, I would say student activities does a great job reaching out to students and getting students involved in these events. And I would say
Okay, I might have lost you or our Wi-Fi stopped. So I think I've lost Matt. I think we're gonna have to stop the recording right here, but thank you, Matt, so much for sharing so much great information on Hispanic Heritage Month. And I look forward to seeing you soon again on campus. Thank you so much. Bye.